Now I am going to pull this motor out and we're going to redo the whole firewall. Stuff like this makes it look a lot better, makes it look a more thought out and a lot more purposeful than just throwing an LS in here.
Welcome back to another episode of Rusted Mod. You guys missed the last episode. We are trying to rebuild our Rambler station wagon, and we're trying to do it in time for Hot Rod Power Tour 2024. So we have a limited time to be able to get this thing done, but we have a lot of work to do. So if you guys missed the last episode, we actually put new coilovers on this thing, and we're trying to basically rip the whole thing apart so that way we can get all the upgrades we need to do in time for Power Tour. When we first put this thing together, we were also under a time crunch and we missed a lot of stuff that we had just kind of thrown together, so we want to try to fix all that stuff now so we don't have to worry about it. So before we start tearing this thing apart, we have a lot of stuff that I want to try to fit up, so let's get to it and get a lot of this work knocked out.
Before we start pulling everything apart on this, I do want to try to fit one more thing up. So we actually want to do air conditioning on the Rambler, and from the beginning that was kind of our game plan. You know, we want to go on road trips with this car, do power tours, stuff like that. Air conditioning is a nice thing to have. Same with heat. We also don't have heat on this car right now. So I want to try to put in our air conditioning kit. It's an ICT billet kit right here, and it goes basically in the spot opposite of the alternator. So I have an air conditioning compressor I bought a long time ago. It's really small, but it works well with the tight space that we have here. So I'm gonna try to throw this kit on and see how it fits, because once we pull everything out, I'm obviously not gonna know where it's going to be. So gonna throw this on real quick and see how it looks. All right, so the air conditioning compressor's on, so that looks like that'll fit pretty good. Kind of what I was looking for, something that we can just mount pretty easily, access it really easily, but not interfere with the stock accessories that we have. These are actually off of a C5 Corvette, so I can get all C5 Corvette accessories and it makes life a little bit easier. So the ICT billet kit fits really nice, and that'll be really good. So we have our ports down here at the bottom, and then we'll go into our firewall. Actually, this, where all the wires are running through, is originally where the air conditioning stuff was supposed to run. So we'll pull all these wires out, rewire it, and route our AC lines right there. Now, I am going to pull this motor out and we're gonna redo the whole firewall, mount everything really nicely organized, and try to make this thing look really good. We're gonna pull it out and redo mostly all that stuff, but at least we have a good idea of where things are going to lay once we get everything put back together. So I got the Rambler off the lift and I set it on the ground so that way we can pull it forward and take all the interior out of it. So if you guys saw on the last clip, we put all the coilover suspension in here, and this thing is sitting finally on its new suspension, but there's one problem. This thing sits really low. So if you guys can see it, the thing's almost touching the ground. The rear coilovers are almost all the way extended. The fronts I could go up a little bit more with. I can go a little bit more with the rear, which I'm probably gonna have to do, but I'm just wondering if the spring rate is a little bit off. But the problem is with running this low is the independent rear suspension has a really bad angle on the half shafts, so we don't want to destroy our U-joints whenever we're driving this thing this low. You gotta get the tire from sitting like this to sitting like straight on. So we want to try to raise it back up a little bit, but for now, at least it rolls. We can move the thing in and out. So what I want to try to tackle now, I want to tear out all the interior. So if you guys have seen, we're going to pull all this wiring and everything out of this thing. We're going to pull the seats out, pull all the carpet out, and just redo this whole thing. I really want to get the dash out so we can fit our new gauges and everything like that and wire everything correctly. So first thing we got to do is start ripping this stuff out, and then we can finally assess how we're going to do the interior. guys, we basically got the entire interior stripped out. We still got to get the column and all the wiring, but all the seats and carpet and dash is removed. What's nice about the Ramblers, unlike some trucks and stuff, is you can actually remove the dash. So we can modify this thing pretty easily. When we pull it out, we pop everything out, get it ready to go, and then we could just place it in the Rambler, plug stuff in, and it should be pretty easy to make all the gauges work and stuff. But we do have to do our interior with our console and our trim piece that goes underneath the roll bar. So I'm going to continue to pull all this stuff out and keep working on the interior. We got a lot of stuff to do in a short amount of time, so we got to get rolling on this thing. But I really need to get this motor pulled out of here so that way I can start cleaning up all this stuff and redoing a lot of it. But the one thing I do need to see before I pull the motor out is our new intake manifold. So I grabbed one of these intake manifolds. I really like the way that these look. I had the similar one on our C10, so I figured this would be a good intake for this thing. I already know it works, I know it looks good, so trying to make the interior of the engine bay look a little bit nicer while we do the interior of the Rambler too. So we have this old BBK intake on here. It works good. I just like the way the other one looks a little bit better. So I'm gonna have to put that on. But the problem is you can see our windshield wiper motor mechanism here. So we actually ran the Camaro windshield wiper motor, and we have some bars that kind of go back and forth so it can be able to work with our windshield wipers, and it all works pretty good, but I think it might hit our intake. So I want to try to pull this off real quick, and that way we can see if it's going to actually clear. If not, I'm gonna have to do something a little different with the windshield wiper setup. So let me pull this off real quick, and then we can get a little bit better look at it and see if it's gonna even fit. This thing clears by just a little bit, but it does clear. Now I don't know if whenever the motor rotates, if it's going to push one of the rods into the top of the intake. We can make that work. So we got our new intake on there. It looks a little bit better than the old intake that was on this thing. So now we can go ahead and yank the motor out of this thing and try to make it look as best as we can. All right, so now that we got our intake off and we know that the new intake is going to fit, I want to go ahead and just yank this motor out, and that way we can clean up our firewall and everything we have to do. So let me start pulling this stuff apart and then pull this motor out. I think that's it on the motor. We had to pull the steering column out. I'm not sure if we have to pull an exhaust manifold off or not. I can't remember. The transmission is just ratchet strapped across, so I've got to pull that strap off. We got the motor mounts off. We have everything unhooked for the radiator and power steering, so we should just be able to put a chain on this thing and pull it out. We got the motor pulled out pretty easily, actually. Thought it'd be a little bit harder. We did make a big mess in there with transmission fluid leaking out. I put a bag over it, but we need to get a cap for that for when we pull this thing in and out. But the engine's out. I'm gotta put a stand together so we can put it on this and roll it around. But we're gonna pull everything off of this, clean it up, and then obviously now we can get to the whole firewall and just clean this mess up. That way when we put it back together, it'll be nice. All right, so I'm gonna start by just pulling off all the accessories and cleaning the engine. The engine was recently cleaned. I had this stuff pulled out whenever we pulled the transmission to get rebuilt. So it's not super dirty and it doesn't really leak very bad, but the power steering is just leaking everywhere. So it's all covered in power steering fluid. So gonna pull all this stuff off, clean it up really good, and get the engine and trans ready to go back in there. So then we can go and clean up all this stuff and dial everything in under the hood, and then we should be ready to go to put this back in here. Alright, so I did buy an accessory kit from ICT Billet that is going to match our air conditioning accessory kit, but I forgot that we actually made this spacer to go onto the Corvette accessories that were on here to meet the Camaro balancer. So I didn't have to run a different water pump and balancer, and that other kit would work. So I'm probably going to have to get some longer bolts for the ICT Billet kit, but I'm just going to mock it up because I want to see how all this stuff goes together, and I want to try to kind of get a look of what the engine's going to look like, because I think we might actually paint the engine. We're going to have to see. We're kind of going back and forth, but I think we might paint the engine a cool color, and we want to do something really cool in the engine bay to just clean it up, make it look a lot more complete and finished. I want to make the accessories and everything really nice. So I'm going to try to just throw this stuff on real quick and see what it's going to look like, and then we can kind of get an idea of what is the game plan that we want to do with this to make it look as best as we can. So the other thing I got for this was these valve covers. Now these are pretty cool. So the coil packs actually mount to these, and they have these shiny covers that go on them, so they'll sit like this and go on like that. So that way it kind of cleans it up. You don't see the coil packs, they're kind of hidden. But we were thinking about maybe engraving this and doing something cool with the valve covers. Stuff like this makes it look a lot better, makes it look a more thought out and a lot more purposeful than just throwing an LS in here. So I'm going to try to put all this stuff on here and see how it looks. Alright, so I got everything on the engine and it looks really good. I'm not really sure how I feel about all the chrome, but we actually might paint this. That's why I wanted to just mock it all up to see what it looks like, to see what we really want to do with this. I've seen some builds where they just literally paint the whole engine, and I was kind of thinking maybe we could do something like that and kind of match this green color that we have on the firewall, because we are going to do some trim and everything else around it. So I'm not really sure, but we're going to figure it out here soon because we got to get this thing back in there. But we have a lot of stuff to go on all this stuff first before we even think about putting the motor back in. So I just want to see how everything fits, but it fits really good. The ICT Billet kit, this one's just sit on there, but I do have to put that spacer back there. I got to order some longer bolts, and then we can put all the accessories on there for real. But if we do paint it, I'll wait and hold off on that and see how we go with painting it or not. So that's what it looks like. It looks really good, way better than it did before. So this thing is really coming along.
All right, guys, our engine turned out really good. I'm really happy with the way this thing looks, but we're Rustomod. We can't just leave everything alone. So I think we're gonna actually paint this engine and do some custom stuff to it to really set it apart from other builds. Now, I do like the chrome. I just don't really think it fits the style of the Rambler. So that's what we really want to try to capture in the engine bay of this build. So we want to do some really cool custom stuff in the next few episodes, so you're not going to want to miss it. We have some really cool stuff coming up with the valve covers that we're going to do, and we have some really cool stuff with what we actually painted the engine. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so you can stay up to date for all the future episodes on the Rambler and all the builds we have here on Rusto Mod. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next episode.